how good was that move around the outside of Copse? Champion's mentality, just trying to do anything to stay in the race. Battling his teammate on the radio, I think Ferrari are potentially the masters of their own demise again. What's up guys, Elliot here with my reaction to the British Grand Prix. And at Silverstone we had the best race of the season so far. So much drama, a big accident at the start, so glad that everyone escaped without serious injury. And how good was that battle at the end with Charles, Lewis and Sergio? There's so much to discuss, so let's get into it. And this weekend, at the end of the day, was about one man, and that man was Carlos Sainz. He took his first pole of his career, and he managed to convert that into the first win of his career. And it was not an easy win to take at all. But I want to firstly quickly mention qualifying. In the improving changeable conditions, it was all about that last lap. And now the drivers that had a real chance to take pole, and I'm talking about Charles, Carlos and Max, he was the only one to deliver a clean lap at the end. Charles spinning on his final lap but brought out the yellows for Max, which meant he had to slow down. But Max actually spinning himself on his first lap in Q3. So really sort of doing the damage to himself and potentially overdriving a little bit there. But Carlos, I don't know if you heard him on the radio at the end, he actually was really surprised. He actually said he felt terrible out there and wasn't particularly happy with his lap. But it's all about keeping it clean, driving fast and not making a mistake, and he managed to do that. So congratulations to him. And then we've got to move on to the race. Max got Carlos into the first corner at the first start. And then at the second start, or the restart after the big accident in first lap, Carlos managing to hold on from Max and battling really hard with him, and it was some good hard racing, good hard defending for Carlos. And that really seemed to set up a good opportunity for the win. But then Max is starting to look a bit faster in the early laps, and Carlos makes a small mistake. He was correcting a bit of oversteer and had to turn out of the corner, so turning away from the corner, and then went off the track. And that gifted Max the lead, and to be honest, looked like it gifted Max the win. But then Max gets some damage, seemingly I'm not sure where from, but he mistakes it for a puncture and heads into the pits. And then the win's back on for Carlos. And then he's battling with his teammate for the rest of the race. His teammate with a little bit of damage on his front wing, costing him a bit of performance. But Charles actually having the pace over Carlos for much of the race. And there's a lot of battling between the two Ferrari drivers, and to be honest, mostly on the radio. Carlos saying that he's got the pace, his team asking him to drive to a certain lap time, Charles behind, asking the team to let him through, which he eventually does. And it's looking like the win is slipping away from Carlos, with Lewis super fast behind the two Ferraris. And then of course we have the safety car a few laps from the end, about 10 or so laps from the end. Carlos pits for soft tyres, Leclerc stays out on the hards. And then on the restart, Ferrari asked Carlos to leave a gap to his teammate ahead, giving him the opportunity to warm up his hard tyres and get a jump on his rivals behind. And Carlos makes the bold decision to disagree with his team and to press on and make that early overtake. And that really sets up the win for him, because Charles battles really hard with Perez and Hamilton behind, holding them off to give Carlos, I think it was about a 4-second gap before Perez managed to get ahead of Charles and chase after him. And that was really the making of the victory for Carlos, and it's a big win for him. It's been a fantastic couple of races. He had a good race in Monaco, he had a great race in Montreal and Canada, and now he's got his first win and his first pole. So fantastic result for Carlos. I'm so happy for him to get his first win. I think this is really what Carlos needed, and hopefully it takes a little bit of pressure off him now, and yeah, maybe the floodgates will open and maybe it'll be many more wins for him for the rest of the season. And then on to Checo. It's an incredible recovery drive from him. He didn't go up the inside of his teammate on the first lap of the second start, which then put him slightly further back and gave Charles the opportunity to go up the inside of him. And that's where Perez got the damage and forced him to pit, because the damage was so great. I then honestly don't have a lot of notes on the rest of his race because we were so focused on the leaders. I think he'd managed to battle his way back up to 4th, and he was a good half a minute behind when the safety car came out, and it was perfectly timed for him. It gave him the opportunity to fight Lewis and Charles and even Carlos. Perez looking super racy at the end there on the softs. Honestly, it's a lucky result for Perez, but a very good P2, so congratulations to him. And then on to Lewis Hamilton. Safety cars have really not been his friend this year. I think he's lost out on pretty much every safety car, and Silverstone was no different. After all the hard work in the race, building the tyre offset, having the tyre advantage over the Ferraris and closing them in all race. Yeah, he's really undone by that safety car. And for me, four things really cost Lewis the win today, and I think the win was on today. Firstly, at the second start, they rolled back the starting positions, and I really don't understand that. Both Max and Lewis made up their positions before the first corner, and when the red flag is thrown, I don't understand why we don't have the technology to say these are the positions at the exact point when the red flag was thrown. It feels weird to backtrack to the start. I understand that they haven't crossed the safety car line, but surely we've got that technology, and it seems incredibly unfair to those drivers that made up the positions. And I understand in a crash situation there are some massive winners and there are some massive losers. I think the Aston Martins really benefited from the carnage at the start, and why have they been disadvantaged as well? So that's an odd one for me. I don't know if that's something that should be looked at, because that feels strange. Point number two, he dropped behind Lando Norris at the start, at the second restart, and that cost him a good few seconds. I think he dropped about 4 seconds behind the Ferraris then, and if you think where he ended up later on in the race, he would have been right on their tail and would have been able to undercut them potentially. I know he's ended up creating the tyre offset, but that 4 seconds could have been costly. And point number three, he's had a slow stop. He's cost himself about 1.5 seconds, and whereas he would have come out the pits right on the Ferraris, he's come out behind them, and I think he came out behind a lapped McLaren as well, which again loses you even more time. And of course, point number four, with the safety car, he's lost the tyre offset as well. So disappointing for Lewis. How good was that double overtake on Checo and Charles? I know they both took each other off wide, but that opportunist move, we see it from all the great drivers. Lewis, Max, Alonso, Sebastian, they all do it. They all go for those gaps. And the noise from the crowd was incredible. Checo managed to get him back somehow. Charles as well around the outside, but some great racing from those drivers at the end. I think this is a really positive weekend for Mercedes. They've definitely closed the gap on the front runners. But one thing that's still left unanswered is whether that's from their updates, and that's the updates that they introduced from Barcelona and here in Silverstone, or whether it's track specific. It's the first track where it's a proper racetrack. You've got a smooth racetrack and the curbs are not too aggressive here. So we'll have to wait and see whether this good form continues, but I think it's a positive weekend for Mercedes, and I have a feeling they'll have a good chance of going well at the Red Bull Ring and in Paul Ricard. And then on to Charles Leclerc. It's got to be a disappointing feeling for him at the end of that race. He had the pace on his teammate all race, to be honest, despite the damage that he incurred on lap one. Mostly battling his teammate on the radio, asking his team to let him through. I want to see racing between teammates. I don't want there to be team wars all the time. I think it ruins it for the fans. But in this situation, the Ferraris were battling Lewis, and it seemed like they were costing themselves time, taking a while to make decisions on who should be let through, who's got the pace advantage. They had the potential there to have cost themselves the win. It's difficult when Carlos is going for his first win. You can't take that away from a driver. But, the two Ferrari drivers battling each other, giving Lewis the opportunity to catch up. I think Ferrari are potentially the masters of their own demise again. Not making good calls. I don't know why Charles wasn't brought in when the safety car was brought out. There seemed to be plenty of time there and a big enough gap for him to get in and for Carlos to get in, both to pit for softs. But Charles was left out there to dry, and when every other driver around him were on softs, we saw how hard the hard tyres were to heat up. On a safety car restart, you're going to struggle to warm up your tyres, and it took him a few laps to build up the temperature and build up that pace again. And by that point, Carlos has already gone, Perez has gone, and Lewis has gone. So difficult weekend for him. I don't know if you saw there, but at the end, Mattia Binotto had seemed like a bit of a stern word with him. I guess not to say anything bad about his team, and they'll do their talking behind closed doors. But how good was that move around the outside of Cops, around Lewis? That's how it's done. Of course, that's where Max and Lewis famously came together there last year in 2021. Lewis again involved on the inside, but they both left each other space, and a fantastic overtake from Charles. But I think at the end of the day, I think it's got to be a disappointing weekend for him. Yes, he's made up points on his main title rival Max, but he's lost out on the win there, and I think, again, that's through a poor strategy call from Ferrari. Then on to Alonso, mega drive from him, finishing in P5. He got the place on Norris under the safety car when Norris pitted for new tyres. He had his nose in, sniffing out the opportunity to get a P4 or a P3. but not quite having the pace to do it. But Alonso's right there and driving really well at the minute, so good result from him. And then Lando, unfortunate not to get P4, his team pitting him, and he's not able to get Fernando Alonso back after the safety car restart, but a good P6 from Lando. And then on to Max. It's a messy race for him, not really his fault at all, but he got the lead after Sainz made the mistake. Max looking like he has the pace on the two Ferraris, but then of course he's got that damage on the rear right. I don't know if he did have a puncture or if he mistook the damage for a puncture, but he had to pit having all sorts of issues, way off the pace because he had huge damage, which we couldn't see. I'm sure it's going to come out in the media in the coming days, but he had a nice battle at the end with Mick, holding on for P7, and I think that has to be deemed as a good result considering the circumstances for Max. And then on to Mick Schumacher, first points of his career, battling with Max hard at the end there, but well done Mick. I think that's got to take a little bit of pressure off him now. Let's hope he can build the rest of his season from here and go from strength to strength. I want to finally discuss the incidents at the start of the race. Firstly, I'm so happy that Zhou was able to walk away from that accident. I mean, not literally walking away from it, he left the track on a stretcher, but he was able to walk back into the paddock just at the end of the race. So glad to see him walking, talking, and seemingly okay. Yeah, I've never seen a car launch like that. It was weird, sliding along the ground upside down, the halo doing its job once again. Yeah, the halo getting dug in and flipping him over the barrier. Thankfully the catch fence stopping him from going into the marshals and the crowd, otherwise it could have been it's unthinkable. But yeah, crazy. I'm sure the FIA and the stewards are going to look into that one because it seemed pretty unsafe. But I want to discuss that incident between Russell, Zhou and Gasly. So Zhou and Russell got poor starts. Russell on the hard, so as we saw in the race, everyone was struggling with tyre warm-ups on the hard. And there's a gap between Zhou and Russell that Gasly goes into. Now, for me, I've got to say it's probably a 50-50 between Gasly and Russell who's to blame in that incident. Russell moving across to try and take as good a line into the first corner as possible. But when you're in that start of the race, you've got to be careful. You can't move offline, and because you're asking for trouble, there's drivers all over the place, not in usual positions under racing conditions. So a little bit of a mistake there, to be honest, in my opinion, from Russell. But then also on Gasly's side, the first corner's coming up soon. If you're going to stick your nose in, you're always going to get pinched. So I think part of the blame's got to be on Gasly there as well. Of course, Gasly tapping the left rear of Russell, which then sent him into Zhou and flipped Zhou over. I thought that was really good battling from Russell to try and stay in the race. Of course, jumping out of the car, we saw him running straight to Zhou to try and help him out. You love to see it. In pretty big contrast between him and Bottas in Imola, of course, last year. Maybe he's learned from his mistakes, which is really good to see. Of course, he's trying to jump back in the car and restart it. He ran to the pits to his team to ask him how he could restart it, telling the stewards not to touch the car. But by the time he'd come back, the stewards had started to lift the car up and brought it back. But him and the team battling to try and get him into the race. And I just love to see that. It's a real champion's mentality, just trying to do anything to stay in the race. He's going to be right at the back, but he felt like he had the pace to make it up the grid and fight through the grid. So yeah, awesome mentality there from Russell. Of course, his first DNF of the season, tough one for him, but I'm sure he's going to bounce back. And after the pace that Lewis showed, it's got to be a good weekend on the whole for Mercedes. And then of course we had another incident at the start between Albon and Vettel. It seemed like Vettel at the start outbraked himself a little bit and went straight into the back of Albon, which pitched Albon into a number of drivers. But unfortunately, I think a lot of the blame there has got to be on Vettel. And over recent years, we've seen Vettel, not been as sharp in wheel-to-wheel combat as he possibly should be, being a four-time world champion. So disappointing there from Vettel, and of course that's ruined Albon's race when he had the new parts on his car that Williams had only brought onto his car. So yeah, bit of a shame for him, but good on the other side of the garage for his teammate Latifi, who got his first Q3 appearance of his career. Congrats to Nicholas, when he's had a difficult year, I think it's safe to say. I know I've only spoken about Formula 1 on this channel so far, but I want to quickly mention W Series. If you don't know what W Series is, it's an all-female category aimed at giving female drivers a platform and the opportunity to race in single-seaters, with the aim of getting them into F3, F2 and ultimately into Formula 1. Jamie Chadwick, if you've not heard of her, she's been utterly dominant in the series. We're into our third series in W Series. She's won the last two, and we're in the fourth race of the season, and she's won all 4 races. But it was a dominant display from her again, winning by 19 seconds clear. Crazy result for her. I know the second and third place drivers collided, but she was still 7 seconds clear at that point of the race. But we've got to find a way to get Jamie into F3. She's miles ahead of the rest of the pack right now, and if she doesn't have a chance, then how has any other female driver got a chance of getting into those feeder categories? You know, plus surely there's marketing potential there with her being the only female driver on the grid. And I don't mean sticking her in a pink car because she's a female driver. I mean, there's got to be some brands out there with the opportunity to market her in a different way, and use her as a platform for a marketing opportunity. Surely there's got to be some money there, which is a thing that's holding her back at the minute. She wants to get into a competitive car in F3, but she needs the funding to do so, and I really hope that she can do that, because it's a real shame that she's not able to make that jump. And I think, yeah, I'd love to see that. So, what did you think of that race in Silverstone? Let me know what you give it out of 10 in the comments below, and check the comments for my rating. Max still with a sizable lead in the championship, and I've got a feeling they're going to be mighty in Austria at their home race at the Red Bull Ring. If you enjoyed the video, please consider dropping a like and subscribe for more F1 content just like this. If you haven't already, check out my video on my top 10 F1 YouTube channels. You might find your new favourite F1 channel, or you could share one of your favourites that I didn't mention. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.